Today we're going to look at what are the elements of a paragraph. The way that we are going to study paragraphs is something called paragraphology. Now when I think about the word paragraphology, I'd like to find the base word of this word. The base word is just the word paragraph. With this word, I know that it has to do something with paragraphs. We're going to also look at the suffix called ology. Ology means the study of something. So we're going to look at the study of paragraphs and use that to help us form a solid paragraph. The elements of a paragraph include the introduction, the first example, one detail, the second example with one detail, the third example with one detail, and the conclusion. Notice you will have 3 examples, each with one detail. As I think about the paragraph that I'm about to create, I need to look at the details that I created for my wedding vows. As I read through the details, I'm going to think about the ones that I need to keep my focus on my narrow topic, or the ones that aren't necessary. My first detail. My father walked me down the aisle slowly, arm in arm, as my dress glided steadily along the aisle. Number 2. Guests were silent as about 150 pairs of eyes watched me while Pachelbel Canon in D was playing on the organ. 3. My hands were slightly shaking and a little warm to the touch. 4. As I peered up, I focused only on the altar in front of me, where Andy met my father and took my arm. 5. My head turned slightly, only to see tears of joy welling up in my grandmother's eyes. 6. Inside my chest, my heart was pounding, but my grin was beaming. This is the day I waited my whole life to celebrate. It was every girl's dream, and it was now becoming a reality. 8. As we held hands, we recited our vows carefully, just as I had practiced. 9. After the vows, I knew it was time to exchange the rings, a promise to stay together forever. I was ready. I knew that was next. However, Andy had to start. The pastor said, "I give you this ring," for Andy to repeat. 12. No response. He tried again. "I give you this ring." 14. I gave Andy the look. You know, that look where your eyes get big and you can't talk, but your eyes are saying, "Hello." 15. With a startle, Andy finally repeated the pastor's words and our vows were complete. 16. I was a little worried for a second that he was getting cold feet, but he was just wrapped up in the moment. 17. Needless to say, that moment was no indication of our future. It has been 7 years since that day, and our vows still mean everything to us. So as you can see, that is 17 details. I'm not going to put all of those details into my paragraph. I'm going to narrow my topic down to my wedding vows, which was my original intention. So I need to go through my details and decide where does that actually start. To help you understand the order of the elements in the paragraph, you're going to be receiving index cards. A green one is for your introduction. 3 yellow ones are 1 for each example, and your pink one is for your conclusion. We will first start with our 3 examples to help us narrow down our topic. As I reread my details about my wedding vows, I notice that it doesn't actually start talking about the wedding vows until right here at number 8, where it says, "As we held hands, we recited our vows very carefully, just as we had practiced." My examples that I mark right here are going to be events that actually happened within that time frame. So number 1, we held our hands to recite the vows. Number 2, after the vows, this is what happened next. I knew it was time to exchange the rings, a promise to stay together forever. And number 3, the pastor said, I give you this ring. And at that point, Mr. Howell didn't remember. The pastor tried again, and that's what he had said. These are going to be the 3 details that I write on my note cards. When I add my events to my index cards, I will take it directly from my notebook, what happened first, second, and third. So number 1 goes right here. As we held hands, we recited our vows. Number 2, after the vows, I knew it was time to exchange the rings, a promise to stay together forever. And number 3, the pastor said, I give you this ring for Andy to repeat. No response. He tried again. I give you this ring. I added a little bit more to my 3rd event because I have a lot of details since that was my biggest event throughout this piece, and I will get into that later. Notice you're going to do your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd examples first in your notebook. After you have written down your 1st, your 2nd, and your 3rd example for your event, you're going to work on your introduction. You may or may not find this in your notebook with your details. I happen to find it right here, right before my 1st detail, where it says, this is the day I waited for my whole life to celebrate. It was every girl's dream, and it was now becoming a reality. When I write this onto my index card, I'm thinking this is a way to open up my topic for the reader to be grabbed and the reader to know what I'm talking about. I may or may not decide to keep this introduction later, or I may make a few revisions, but this is a good way for me to identify what my topic is with my reader. Here's what it looks like where it's all laid out with all of my index cards. The introduction is first, and it sets the topic up for the reader. It says, this is the day I waited my whole life to celebrate. It was every girl's dream, and it was now becoming a reality. My 3 examples are directly after it. As I read my paragraph all together, I will think about how smooth it is and if there are any gaps between what the reader knows and what I know. After we have completed the 3 events, the introduction, it is now time for the conclusion. When I think about my conclusion, I think about something that can summarize what I've just stated. It might be something that I've learned. It might be something that I want my reader to remember. It might be a question that I have for my reader. What I have found is when I looked in my notebook, my conclusion was right there. I'm going to use, needless to say, that moment was no indication of our future. It has been 7 years since that day, and our vows still mean everything to us. This summarizes that moment that I had with Mr. Howell at the altar doesn't mean anything because our marriage is still going strong. What this now looks like is in my index cards, I will have my introduction, my 3 examples, or my 3 main events, and then my conclusion.